Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Okay, everyone, I'm not going to be scrolling this article because the print is way too fine. I will be reading on my tablet. This is from Inside Scientology. Declaration of Stacy Brooks Young. I, Stacy Brooks Young, declare as follows. 1. I am over the age of 18 years. I have been retained as an expert consultant and expert witness by Dr. U. Gertz Counsel in the case captioned Church of Scientology International versus Stephen Fishman and U. Gertz. Number Charlie Victor -6426 Hotel Lima Hotel, Texas. Currently pending in the United States District Court, Central District of California. The statements herein are of my own personal knowledge or reasonably based upon information and belief, and if called upon as a witness, I can testify competently thereto. This declaration, number 3, this declaration is submitted in support of Defendant Dr. Gertz's opposition to CSI's motion for continuation of confidentiality order entered September 22nd, 1993. Opposition to CSI's motion to seal recreated versions of plaintiff's confidential upper-level scriptures, and opposition to CSI's motion for attorney fees, costs, and sanctions under 29 U.S.C. Section 1927, etc. etc. Number 4. I was a Scientologist for nearly 15 years, from January 1975 until July 1989. I was in the Guardian Office, GO, and its successor, a name change only, the Office of Special Affairs, OSA. For most of that time, I also worked in another part of Scientology called Author Services Incorporated, ASI. Scientology's upper-level materials are already easily accessible to the public. Number 5. It is incredible that plaintiff CSI is still concerned about maintaining any degree of confidentiality of Scientology's so-called upper-level materials. The information contained in these documents has been available at any large public or university library for many years. Attached as Exhibit 1 is a sampling of the many books and newspaper and magazine articles in which these materials have been published. The fact is that these materials are no longer confidential. They are already broadly publicly available. For the court to continue to maintain their confidentiality is somewhat like closing the barn door after the cows have already escaped. Dr. Gertz's counsel has not been harassive in his defense. Number 6, CSI's counsel accused Mr. Berry of being harassive in his defense of his client. This is ludicrous. I have personal knowledge that Mr. Berry has not intended to be harassive, nor has he acted in a harassive manner. I have been advising him in this case as an expert on Scientology practices, policies, and language. CSI cites Mr. Berry's use of certain Scientology words and phrases as an example of his harassive tactics. In fact, I advised Mr. Berry that he would be much more successful in communicating with Scientologists if he learned the Scientology language and spoke it as much as possible when dealing with the Scientologists. In addition, that he learned the Scientology definition of words that are in common English usage, but are defined differently by L. Ron Hubbard. In the past, communications between Scientology and opposing counsel would have been like two ships passing in the night. How can it be harassive when someone goes to the trouble to learn an extremely complex language just so that he can better communicate? Or has Scientology now decided that non-Scientologists are not allowed to use Scientology words? Seven, CSI cites two words used by Mr. Berry in a letter as examples of his abuse of the Scientology religion. Yet the two words he used are strictly administrative terms, having nothing to do with religious beliefs whatsoever. Dev-T is a word that means developed traffic, an administrative term for unnecessary or duplicative work. CSWP stands for completed staff work, please. This term is simply a request for a full proposal. There is nothing religious in either of these phrases. They always use that. Religion as a defense. The testimony of Scientology experts is in the public interest and should not be sealed. Number 8. Mr. Lubell, an attorney for CSI, stated in his original motion to strike or seal my expert declarations in this case that if there were such a thing as an expert on Scientology scripture, such a designation could only be made by the church. Yet the truth is just the opposite. It is only someone who has been directly involved with Scientology management and then leaves the cult, as I did, who can be trusted to provide the court with straightforward information about the inner workings and practices of Scientology. It is utterly impossible for anyone who is still a Scientologist and who therefore still believes that their entire future depends upon remaining a Scientologist to tell the truth about Scientology. The organization would immediately punish anyone who did so. In short, one can only tell the truth after having made the decision no longer to adhere to the policies of Scientology, which include protecting it at all costs and never uttering a word of criticism or adverse testimony. Number 9. Contrary to the representations that have been made about my motives in numerous declarations and motions filed in this litigation, I agree to assist Mr. Berry in his defense of Dr. Gertz because I think it is crucial for outsiders to begin to understand what Scientology really is, what motivates its members, how the leadership views non-Scientologists and critics of Scientology, particularly psychiatrists and psychologists, such as defendant Dr. U. Gertz. How Scientologists manipulate the courts for their own ends and the cold-bloodedness with which people like Stephen Fishman are coerced into parting with huge sums of money. "10. The Scientology attorneys claim that I am putting the religious beliefs of Scientology on trial. That is nonsense. This is the United States of America. People have the right to believe whatever they want to, and I have no desire to convince anyone to stop believing in the Scientology philosophy. It is the practice of this organization that concern me, not the belief system. Violations of civil and human rights, to say nothing of common decency, are so rampant in this organization that it is extremely difficult for an outsider to comprehend why anyone would remain in such a group." They won't let him leave. "11. Indeed, this is precisely why the Scientologists continue to get away with such abuse. Former members have such bizarre, outrageous tales to tell that outsiders find their stories very difficult to believe. And the Scientologists do everything they can to discredit the former members as mercenaries, liars, thieves, lunatics, and worse, as evidenced by the language that has been used by Scientology leaders and their attorneys to describe me during the course of this litigation. The result is that while declaration after declaration has been filed, detailing horror stories of sleep deprivation, starvation, involuntary incarceration, loss of consortium, child abuse, suicide, financial crimes, and more, Scientology has successfully convinced many courts that the authors of such statements were nothing more than embittered apostates, as they have now described me. And it's still going on. "12. The truth is much simpler. I am no longer under the influence of the coercive and manipulative methods of Scientology, and I can now see how abusive the practices of this group are. There are many people who are still in its psychological and emotional captives. And these people are not only being victimized by the Scientology C organization command structure, but are also perpetrating abuse on others, including children who cannot speak for themselves. People are being held under guard. People are being interrogated on the e-meter for the slightest infraction or the slightest hint of disaffection. Women are being coerced into aborting their unborn children. Parents are being kept from their children for weeks and even months at a time. Scientology registrars are coercing people to part with their life savings. They are convincing people to turn over their credit cards. Scientology leaders are pouring money into the Sea Org coffers, while staff in the local organizations live in abject poverty. "13. In his declaration of February 28, 1994, Heber Jensch objected to my reference to the dangerous methods of black Dianetics. Yet methods of reverse processing are employed as control tactics against Scientology staff members on a regular basis. I have no doubt that he himself has been the target of such methods. Such methods include brutal interrogations, auditing, sec checks, in which 2 or more people gang up on someone who has usually been deprived of sleep for days, in locked room, and scream abuses until the person confesses to anything they want him or her to confess to. Overt withhold write-ups in which the person is forced to continue writing up crimes, whether real or imagined, until someone decides he or she has come clean and is allowed to stop. Ethics conditions in which one is not upgraded to the next condition until one has satisfied the ethics officer or senior that one has fully confronted one's criminality group, musters at which staff members are publicly condemned for their crimes. This is reportedly a favorite pastime of Miscavige at the high-security Hemet compound. Denounced to their peers in order to jump into a freezing lake as punishment. "14. Mr. Jench stated that both my husband and I have been on the Rehabilitation Project Force, or RPF. This is very true, and it is where the most horrifying of the abuses takes place, out of sight of anyone else, where staff members are stunned to discover that they themselves are. Mind you, this goes on with children as well. Fair game for whatever punishment or coercive tactics those in control of Scientology think should be meted out to them. There is no recourse short of leaving Scientology. There is no way off the RPF except to finish the program, and the product of the program is a person who will be utterly, uncritically compliant with his or her seniors without question. Until that is achieved, the person is not a product and must remain on the RPF. I know that this is true. I experienced it, and so did my husband. So have many other people who have already spoken out about this. I note that there are many things I've stated in my declarations which have not been challenged by Mr. Moxon, Mr. Jench, Mr. Miscavige, Mr. Starkey, or any of the other Scientology leaders in their declarations. This is because what I have said is true, and they would be perjuring themselves to state otherwise. They malign my character, they call me many names, but they do not dispute the facts contained in my declarations. I am vile and scurrilous. Not because I am lying, but because I am telling the truth to people outside of Scientology. "15. I note that there are many things I stated in my declarations which have not been challenged by Mr. Moxon, Mr. Jench, Mr. Miscavige, Mr. Starkey, or any of the other Scientology leaders in their declarations. This is because what I have said is true, and they would be perjuring themselves to state otherwise. They malign my character, they call me many names, but they do not dispute the facts contained in my declarations. I am vile." I'm sorry, you guys, I read that twice. 16. Reference is made to the declarations filed by Mr. Moxon, Mr. Jench, Mr. Miscavige, Mr. Starkey, and the other Scientology leaders. They are telling what L. Ron Hubbard called acceptable truths. And Mr. Jench and Mr. Moxon are both veterans of this tactic. So am I. I used to write much of the material that was used to discredit people. Accordingly, I am very familiar with the process by which these declarations were written. These people would have been intently searching through my declarations, looking for statements that could easily be discredited. Obviously, they were not able to find very many, based on what they have written. "17. Mr. Jench provides a good example of a Scientology tactic, which is to divert attention off the actual point." Sounds like Rinder, doesn't it? "I stated in my January 4th declaration that what found most shocking about Stephen Fishman's treatment by Scientology was that he was sold e-meters even though he could never qualify for auditing. Mr. Jench never explains why someone who would never be eligible for training or processing would have been sold e-meters. Instead, he skirts around the issue, saying that the various uses of e-meters by Scientology ministers is hardly relevant to this court. Yet, in fact, the uses of the e-meter are extremely relevant. I repeat what I stated in my earlier declaration. Only people who are eligible for auditor training or solo auditing, indeed only people who are ministers or ministers in training, are supposed to be sold e-meters. Fishman was eligible for neither. He should never have been sold an e-meter." 18. Mr. Jensch then mischaracterizes what I wrote in paragraph 62 of my January 4th declaration. I never said, as he claims, that Fishman was driven mad by reading Scientology materials. On the contrary, I stated, there is little doubt that Fishman used his e-meters to audit himself, an action that could easily drive him into a psychotic break. Self-auditing is known in Scientology as a sign of a borderline psychotic. To sell someone with a known history of hypnotherapy an e-meter so that they can self-audit is tantamount to driving them into a psychotic break. Any technically trained Scientologist can confirm this, although no one who is still inside would be allowed to do so. And we know how many psychotic breaks they've had in there. And that's the one those are the ones we know about. 19. Mr. Jensch states that the plaintiff can produce 1,500 staff members of plaintiff CSI who are more competent than the Youngs and could testify that they are wrong. Of course, all 1,500 staff members of CSI will testify that I am wrong, if they are ordered to do so. They have no choice. It doesn't matter what they personally believe. If they do otherwise, then denounce me for what I am revealing about Scientology. They will be declared suppressive and expelled or sent to the RPF to be made more compliant. Indeed, it has been my experience that the current Scientology leaders will stop at nothing to protect Scientology from anyone they perceive as a threat. 20. I am still recovering from my experience in Scientology. I am still learning about how groups like Scientology use coercive methods to control people like myself, my husband, and many other individuals who are still under its spell. I believe that all Scientologists, even the current leadership, are the victims of Hubbard's version of mind control, just as I was. These people, including the Scientology attorneys and paralegals who deal with the courts, have no idea how much they are under the coercive influence of Scientology and its leaders. Yes, they do. They know. They are utterly fanatical about their dedication and determined to protect Scientology from enemies like my husband and me. Anything for money. "21. I have no wish to turn this litigation into a personal war with Scientology, as Mr. Jensch suggested in his declaration. It is Scientology, by its refusal to admit the truth of its actions, that invariably turns any litigation into a war. 22. There have been a number of people before me who have publicly told the truth about Scientology, and nearly every one of them has been threatened, frightened, coerced, or bought off into silence. I have spoken to many of these people and many others who are too frightened to come forward publicly, and I can assure you that the information I have been providing to this court can be corroborated by many other former Scientologists. These people are not embittered apostates. They are decent human beings who regret having wasted years of their lives in an organization which they now realize was coercive and destructive of their civil and human rights. They have friends who are still captive, as do I. They want to do whatever they can to help those who are still in this group, as do I. I feel it is my duty to provide the truth to the court as long as the court finds it relevant. 23. I also feel it is imperative upon the court not to seal what I and other Scientology experts like me have to say. There are citizens of the United States right now whose civil rights are being trampled upon and who have no recourse to the laws of this country. This is happening right in Los Angeles and many other cities. There is a compound called the Base, or INT, near Hemet, California, in Riverside County, where security guards keep watching the staff members to make sure they do not leave the compound. If these people violate the Scientology rules, they risk being refused food and shelter. Others are being involuntarily imprisoned. The women at this compound are not allowed to get pregnant, and if they do, they are coerced into getting abortions at the Riverside Planned Parenthood Clinic. Church funds are being spent to build exercise rooms and sports fields for the exclusive use of celebrities like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, using slave labor from the RPF at $5 a week. These laborers are kept up for days at a time at the whim of Scientology leaders like David Miscavige. This has to be a program. Children are being kept at camps away from their parents for weeks at a time. Parents who ask to see their children more than this are frowned upon. Children are considered distractions to production. Mr. Jensch knows this. Well, and now his son is dead. He and his wife Karen were coerced by David Miscavige. Oh, they just blame David for everything. Were coerced by David Miscavige into being divorced because Karen wanted Heber to spend more time with their son, Alexander. Miscavige viewed Alexander as a distraction to Heber's production. It's all Miscavige's fault, isn't it? "24. My expert declarations have nothing to do with religious beliefs. They have to do with serious violations of civil rights of U.S. citizens. This is not the view of an embittered apostate. This is the view of a citizen of this country who feels that all Americans have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, no matter what their religious beliefs. If the court were to silence voices like mine, as a Scientologist would like the court to do, there would be no one to speak for the people who are being victimized and destroyed by this group. People like Fishman and Dr. Gertz, whose only crime has been to tell the truth to the best of their knowledge. I declare under penalty or perjury under the laws of the United States of America and the state of California that the foregoing is true and correct. Executed in Los Angeles, California, this day of March 1994. Signed by Stacy Brooks Young." So that's it, you guys. I will definitely put the link in the description box. So clearly, LAPD, FBI, whom else? Homeland Security now, because that's a fairly newer organization. IRS, everybody knows this is going on. Child Protective Services, all of that. Adult Protective Services, everyone knows what's going on. And this is 1993, so how many years ago was that? I don't know, like 40 or about almost 50 years. At least 40. So anyways, you guys, link in the description box. Peace.